The Millionaire CEO humiliated a poor girl while she was trying to defend her mother. But days later, he was paralyzed by what he discovered about her. But before we continue, subscribe to the channel and leave your like to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Lee Jun-ho is a man who believes the world revolves around him. As the billionaire CEO of Lee Enterprises, he built his fortune through hard work, but also through a cold and calculating approach. To him, emotions are weaknesses, and empathy is a luxury that no one can afford. He runs his employees with an iron grip, never caring about their well-being as long as profits keep rising. Jun-ho always sees himself above others, and his way of treating people reflects that, especially when he thinks someone is unworthy of his attention or respect. That day, Jun-ho attends a charity event hosted by Lee Enterprises. However, his presence there is purely for obligation and appearances. He has no intention of truly engaging with the causes or the people there. In his eyes, everything around him is fleeting and uninteresting. Choi Ji-ah, a young woman of humble background, arrives at the event alongside her mother. They were invited as beneficiaries of one of the company's social initiatives. Ji-ah is a kind-hearted person who believes that, with hard work, things can change. She is used to helping her mother, who worked tirelessly to raise her daughter with the little she had. Ji-ah's mother ends up in a minor argument with one of the event staff, who refuses to help her find her seat. Seeing this, Ji-ah approaches to help, trying to calm the employee. However, at that exact moment, Lee Jun-ho passes by and notices the situation. He watches Ji-ah's mother with disdain and, without even asking what happened, assumes they're causing unnecessary trouble. Annoyed by the rude behavior of the staff member and Jun-ho's look of superiority, Ji-ah can't hold back and confronts him. "Excuse me, but don't you think you could treat us with a bit more respect? We're guests of your company." Jun-ho is momentarily surprised by her audacity. It's not common for anyone to confront him, much less someone who, in his eyes, is just a nobody. He decides to snap back. "Respect? Do you think people like you understand anything about respect? You should be grateful to be here. We don't do charity to be disrespected." Jun-ho's icy tone cuts through Ji-ah like a knife. She feels anger and shame rising in her chest, but tries to stay calm. "I believe you don't understand what real respect is. Money doesn't buy character." Jun-ho's expression changes. He doesn't like being questioned, especially by someone who, in his eyes, represents everything he despises: vulnerability and weakness. Jun-ho decides it's time to show everyone what happens to those who challenge him. He raises his voice so those around can hear. "Do you know who you're talking to? I'm Lee Jun-ho, CEO of Lee Enterprises. I don't have time to deal with people who don't know their place. If you're so unhappy, the door is right over there. I don't need ungrateful people at my event." Ji-ah's mother pulls her by the arm, begging her to let it go. But Ji-ah is too hurt to back down now. "Your money and your position don't give you the right to humiliate people like this. One day, maybe you'll realize life is much more than status." Her words are a direct affront to Jun-ho's pride. He smirks disdainfully and turns to the security guards, who had been watching closely. "Please escort our guests to the exit." Ji-ah and her mother are removed from the event, under the curious and surprised gazes of other guests. Ji-ah's face burns with shame, but her humiliation is overshadowed by her desire to prove Jun-ho wrong. She's not going to forget this anytime soon. As the two leave, Jun-ho barely gives the incident another thought. He continues his evening, believing he did the right thing. To him, it was just another person trying to take advantage of his generosity, and he thinks Ji-ah and her mother are no different. Ji-ah, meanwhile, is in shock, but a flame of determination ignites in her heart. That night would become a turning point in her life, and she decides then and there that she will never allow herself to be treated like that again. After the disastrous night at the event, Ji-ah tries to move on with her life, but the public humiliation and contempt she felt from Lee Jun-ho won't leave her mind. She recalls his cutting words and his look of superiority, as if she and her mother were insignificant. Determined to bury this painful memory, Ji-ah focuses on supporting her mother and returns to her job as an assistant in a small convenience store. However, fate had other plans for Ji-ah. A few days later, she receives an unexpected call from a lawyer who claims to represent her paternal grandfather, Yoon Byung-chol. She barely knew her grandfather, as he had broken off relations with her father before Ji-ah was born, and he had never shown interest in her or her mother. But to her surprise, the lawyer informs her that her grandfather, who recently passed away, named her the sole heir in his will. Shaken by the news, Jia tries to make sense of what this means, but agrees to meet with the lawyer to hear more. At the reading of the will, she learns that she has inherited a vast fortune and, to her shock, has been appointed president of Lee Enterprises, the very company that Junho manages. Jia is completely stunned. She can't understand why her grandfather, a man who was never part of her life, would entrust such an empire to her. Even more surprising is the fact that now she will be the boss of the man who humiliated her so cruelly. With fear and hesitation, but feeling that this is a twist of fate, Jia decides to accept the challenge. Honoring her grandfather's legacy drives her, but she also sees this as a chance to face Junho on equal ground. Deep down, there is an intense desire to prove to him that she is not the insignificant person he judged her to be that night. On the day Jia arrives at the Lee Enterprises headquarters for her first meeting as president, the atmosphere is tense. The employees glance at each other in surprise, watching the humble young woman entering the company with the title of boss. News of her appointment as president caused a stir, but no one is more unsettled than Lee Junho. He can hardly believe what is happening and tries to convince the board that this decision is a mistake. What he didn't know, however, was that Jia had her grandfather's support in his will. Therefore, the board accepts the decision without question. For Junho, this is humiliating. The poor girl he dismissed so callously is now above him in the hierarchy, and he has no choice but to follow her orders. When Jia enters the boardroom, Junho stares at her coldly, but behind his eyes, he feels something he's never experienced before: insecurity. Instead of feeling in control, he finds himself in a vulnerable position. Jia, meanwhile, keeps her head high and her gaze steady, even though inside, she still feels the insecurity of someone completely new to this world. As she greets everyone and explains that she intends to bring a new vision to the company, Jia makes it clear that she plans to follow a philosophy different from the one Junho has imposed. She talks about empathy, social responsibility, and her desire to make the company more humane. Junho can't hide his contempt and irritation at hearing these words, seeing it all as a waste of time. When the meeting ends, Jia prepares to leave the room, but Junho intercepts her in the hallway, determined to confront her. Of course, this is all a joke, isn't it? Do you really think you can run a company of this size without any experience? He says with a mocking smile. Jia stares at him, her expression serious and calm. With all due respect, Mr. Lee, I believe the company needs more than experience. It needs a shift in values, and I'm here to ensure that. Junho laughs sarcastically. You think you're going to change the way this company works? Good luck. You'll need more than good intentions to handle the real world. Unfazed, Jia replies, I've learned how to deal with people like you, Mr. Lee. I'm here to stay, and I'm not going to give up just because you don't believe in me. The tension between them is palpable. Junho realizes that Jia is no longer the same girl he humiliated that night, and that bothers him. He feels he's lost control, and her presence begins to threaten everything he has built. In the days that follow, Jia starts studying every aspect of the company, determined to understand how she can positively influence operations. She spends sleepless nights trying to learn and adapt, earning the sympathy of many employees who see in her a leader with principles that have long been forgotten. Meanwhile, despite his reluctance, Junho begins to feel a disturbing curiosity about her. He doesn't understand how someone without experience and without the strength he considers essential for leadership can earn the respect of others so quickly. The employees start to talk about Jia's determination, and some even dare to confide in her about the severe and impersonal treatment they always received from Junho. Although he doesn't admit it, this starts to affect him. For the first time, he feels he has to fight to maintain his position of respect within the company. Though he doesn't want to admit it, Junho starts observing Jia differently, curious to understand what makes her so unique. She's patient, attentive, and determined to do good, even with the challenges she faces every day. And although he tries to ignore it, he realizes that something about his new boss is starting to haunt his thoughts. One afternoon, after an exhausting meeting, Jia and Junho end up leaving the building at the same time. As they wait for the elevator, Junho decides to provoke her, feeling he needs to regain control of the situation. Do you really think your approach is going to take this company anywhere? he asks with a challenging smile. Ji-ah looks at him, exhausted but determined. I think we're already getting somewhere, Mr. Lee. The employees are more motivated and satisfied. Doesn't that reflect in the results, or haven't you noticed? Junho doesn't respond immediately, but something in his expression changes. He feels she challenged him again, but this time he can't react with the same coldness. Deep down, he knows that, in some way, Ji-ah is making an impression he can't ignore. Days later, during an internal company event, one of the employees publicly thanks Ji-ah for the changes she proposed, mentioning how the work environment has become lighter and more productive since she took over as president. Everyone applauds, and Junho watches in silence, feeling a pang of discomfort but also a hint of pride. Although he tries to keep his composure, he realizes that he's losing control of his own heart. After the event, Junho and Ji-ah cross paths in the hallway. She's smiling, pleased with the employee's recognition, and Junho, on impulse, decides to congratulate her. You did a good job today, he says in a reserved tone. Surprised, Ji-ah looks at him for a few seconds before smiling. Thank you, Mr. Lee. I'm glad you noticed. For a brief moment, they exchange a look that seems to suspend time. Junho feels his heart race, and Ji-ah, still surprised by the compliment, looks away, not sure how to react. The tension between them shifts, and the antagonism begins to transform into something more complex, more subtle. As Junho walks away, he feels a whirlwind of emotions he can't explain. He realizes that something about Ji-ah is affecting him in a way no one ever has. The convictions he always held, the certainty that everything was about power and control, now seem fragile. He tries to fight this feeling, telling himself it's all just a temporary reaction, but Ji-ah's image continues to invade his thoughts at every moment. At the end of yet another day, he finds himself reflecting on who he is and what really matters. For the first time, Lee Junho, the powerful and unbreakable CEO, feels that someone has made him question everything he ever believed in. Ji-ah, for her part, feels something similar. She realizes that behind Junho's arrogance, there may be someone who is trying to open up, but fears showing his vulnerability. Amid this complexity of emotions, they begin to see each other not just as rivals, but as someone who can bring out the best and the worst in one another. In the days that follow, the tension between Ji-ah and Junho intensifies. Their daily interactions reveal deep differences, especially in how each of them views the company and its employees. While Junho maintains his rigid stance, focused solely on results and profit, Ji-ah tries to implement changes that prioritize employee well-being in a more collaborative environment. At first, these proposals seem naive in Junho's eyes, but they start catching the attention and sympathy of many in the office, only adding to his irritation. During an important meeting, Ji-ah proposes that part of the company's budget be allocated to a psychological support program for employees, arguing that productivity would improve if people had adequate emotional support. Junho can hardly believe what he's hearing. He looks at Ji-ah with skepticism and, without hesitation, interrupts her speech in front of everyone. With all due respect, President Choi, we're here to work, not to discuss our employees' personal problems, he says sharply, creating an uncomfortable silence in the room. However, Ji-ah remains calm. She responds, I believe the employees are the heart of this company, Mr. Lee. If we take care of them, they'll take care of the company. A healthy and motivating environment is essential for everyone's growth. The other executives observe the intense exchange of glances between them, feeling the charged atmosphere. For many, it's new to see someone stand up to Lee Junho. He's always been treated with an almost fearful respect. But Ji-ah isn't afraid to question him, and that unsettles Junho. Feeling his authority challenged, he abruptly ends the meeting and leaves the room without another word. As he exits, he realizes that, for some reason, the image of Ji-ah defending her ideas with such conviction won't leave his mind. That night, Junho is alone in his office, the city lights of Seoul flickering outside the window. He tries to concentrate on reports and spreadsheets, but Ji-ah's words keep echoing in his head. He recalls each time she met his gaze without flinching, defending what she believes in. Instead of feeling irritated, he begins to feel a slight admiration, though he won't admit it to himself. This girl, the one he dismissed at their first encounter, is doing something no one has ever done, making him question his own certainties. In the following days, confrontations between Jia and Junho become almost routine. She continues to propose initiatives that benefit employees, such as flexible hours and training opportunities, while he insists on cutting any project that, in his view, compromises profitability. They clash openly in meetings, sometimes with the executives watching their exchanges as if it were a personal battle. And while Junho pretends not to be affected, Jia's determination is slowly captivating him. One day, he decides to observe Jia at work without her knowing. He sees her talking with employees, asking about their concerns and listening attentively, something he's never done himself. Junho watches how people open up to Jia, feeling that she genuinely cares about what they have to say. For the first time, he feels a strange discomfort. He begins to wonder if perhaps his way of leading the company has overlooked something important. Junho tries to deny this growing admiration, but things get even more complicated when he starts noticing other feelings emerging. He finds himself observing details that had previously gone unnoticed. Jia's smile when talking to someone, her patience in listening, and the way she faces challenges without hesitation. These little details, which he never imagined he'd notice, start to disturb his thoughts. He tries to push these feelings away, convincing himself that it's all just an unwanted distraction. One afternoon, after an exhausting meeting, Jia and Junho happen to leave the office at the same time. While waiting for the elevator, Junho decides to provoke her, feeling the need to reassert control. "Do you really think your approach is going to take this company anywhere?" he asks with a challenging smile. Jia stares at him, tired but resolute. "I think we're already getting somewhere, Mr. Lee. The employees are more motivated and satisfied. Isn't that reflected in the results, or have you not noticed?" Junho doesn't respond immediately, but something in his expression shifts. He feels that she's challenged him once again, but this time he can't react with the same coldness. Deep down, he knows that, in some way, Jia is leaving an impression he can't ignore. Days later, during an internal company event, one of the employees decides to publicly thank Jia for the changes she has implemented, mentioning how the work environment has become lighter and more productive since she took over as president. The room fills with applause, and Junho watches silently, feeling a pang of discomfort but also pride. Although he tries to remain composed, he realizes that he's losing control of his own heart. After the event, Junho and Jia cross paths in the hallway. She's smiling, pleased with the recognition from the employees, and Junho, on impulse, decides to congratulate her. "You did a good job today," he says, in a restrained tone. Surprised, Jia looks at him for a few seconds before smiling. "Thank you, Mr. Lee. I'm glad you noticed." For a brief moment, they exchange a look that seems to stop time. Junho feels his heart race, and Jia, still surprised by the compliment, looks away, unsure how to react. The tension between them shifts, and the antagonism starts to transform into something more complex, more subtle. As he walks away, Junho feels a whirlwind of emotions he can't explain. He realizes that something about Jia is affecting him in a way no one ever has. The beliefs he has always held, the certainty that everything is about power and control, now seem fragile. He tries to fight this feeling, telling himself it's just a temporary reaction, but the image of Jia keeps invading his thoughts at every moment. At the end of another long day, he finds himself reflecting on who he is and what really matters. For the first time, Lee Junho, the powerful and unyielding CEO, feels that someone has made him question everything he once believed. Jia, on the other hand, feels something similar. She realizes that behind Junho's arrogance, there may be someone who is trying to open up, but is afraid of showing vulnerability. Amid this complexity of emotions, they begin to see in each other not just a rival, but someone who can bring out both the best and the worst in themselves. A few weeks later, the dynamic between Jia and Junho becomes even more tense. Her presence affects him in ways he can't control, but for Jia, it's harder and harder to ignore the hurt and humiliation he caused her. Still, she notices that Junho seems to be changing, showing moments of kindness and even acknowledging her initiatives, though always with a guarded air. Despite this, Jia remains cautious, avoiding any sign of vulnerability in front of the man who hurt her so deeply. One day, while going through old company documents, Junho finds a confidential file about Jia's family. The file reveals a series of details about the falling out between her father and her grandfather, Yoon Byung-chul. As he reads, Junho discovers a shocking secret. Jia's father had been expelled from the family after a financial scandal that damaged the Yoon family name. To protect the company's and family's image, Jia's grandfather cut all ties with his son, and as part of the public fallout, promised that his granddaughter would have no access to the family wealth, believing this would protect the company's reputation. Junho realizes that this secret could deeply unsettle Jia, especially since she never knew the real reason her family was cut off from her grandfather. He considers using this information to regain control and pressure her to step down as president. However, as he reflects on it, he feels a pang of guilt. He knows that Jia is there to honor her grandfather's legacy, and undermining her confidence could destroy everything she has worked for. Troubled, Junho puts the file back, but the dilemma continues to haunt him. He's consumed by an internal struggle, whether to do what's best for his career or respect the feelings that are growing inside him for Jia. For days, he tries to forget what he discovered, but Jia's presence, her initiatives, and her genuine dedication continue to disarm him. On a rainy night, Junho finds Jia at the company's exit. She had stayed late to review social project proposals, and the two end up leaving together. She thanks him for supporting some of the recent changes, trying to show that she notices his efforts to accept the company's new direction. Junho watches the sincerity in her eyes, feeling increasingly burdened by the secret he's keeping. They walk down the street together under the same umbrella, and the silence between them becomes almost comforting. In a moment of vulnerability, Junho decides to share a little of his own story. "My family always expected me to be perfect," he says, his gaze lost in the city lights reflected on the wet sidewalk. "I never had a choice but to be strong and control everything. I grew up believing I was better than anyone, but it only left me empty." Jia, surprised to see him open up like this, realizes that the arrogant man she knew has a human side, hidden beneath years of pressure and family expectations. She responds gently. Being strong doesn't always mean being insensitive. Sometimes making space for others shows even more strength. Junho looks at her in silence, feeling those words resonate deeply within him. But at that moment, Jia remembers the pain from his past humiliations, and it stirs a fresh ache in her heart. Though she sees a different side of Junho, she's still not sure she can fully trust him. For her, admiration and resentment are intertwined, creating a confusing tension. That night, as he prepares to sleep, Junho decides that he can't keep the secret from Jia any longer. The weight of the truth is becoming unbearable, and he fears that if she learns about it from someone else, she will never forgive him. The next day, Junho calls her for a conversation in his office. Sitting at his desk, he hesitates for a moment, but then gathers his courage and hands her the file, explaining that he found information about why her father was cut off from her family. He watches her expression as she reads, seeing her shift between surprise, sadness, and finally a mix of pain and confusion. Why are you showing me this now?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. "Were you planning to use this against me?" Junho shakes his head, his gaze sincere. "No, I needed you to know the truth. I can't change the past, but I can make sure you understand it. I thought you deserved to know." Jia feels a torrent of emotions, but despite the hurt, she realizes that Junho's action was motivated by a sincerity she didn't expect. Still, she can't ignore how deeply this information has shaken her. Her relationship with her father had always been an open wound, and now, with this revelation, everything feels even more painful and confusing. Feeling vulnerable, Jia pulls away from Junho. She needs space to process what she's learned, and the memory of Junho's past disdain makes her hesitate to trust him completely. With a heavy heart, she leaves his office without looking back, while Junho watches her go, feeling a growing emptiness inside him. The following days are marked by silence between them. Jia avoids crossing paths with Junho, and he respects her need for space, even though he feels the pain of her absence. He realizes that with each moment she avoids him, he's losing something he never thought he wanted: her trust and respect. Seeing her pull away, he understands that what he feels for Jia is deeper than he ever imagined. She is, unknowingly, becoming the person he most wants by his side. Jia, for her part, also feels torn. Junho's gesture, though sincere, left her feeling vulnerable. She knows that his version isn't the same as the arrogant man who humiliated her that night. However, the pain of the revealed secret still pulses strongly in her heart, and she has to decide whether to trust Junho or continue building her path alone. When they finally cross paths in the hallway a few days later, the tension between them is almost palpable. Junho gathers his courage and with a softer voice says, "I'm sorry for everything, Ji-ah. I can't change what I did, but if you give me a chance, I'll prove that I can change." Ji-ah looks at Junho for a few seconds, trying to understand if his words are genuine. Confused by her feelings, she realizes that, for the first time, she's seeing him differently. She takes a deep breath and replies, "Words are easy, Mr. Lee. Showing that you've changed is the real challenge." Junho nods, accepting the challenge she's given him. He understands that he has to do more than apologize. He has to show, through his actions, that he's not the same man who once humiliated her. And at the moment, a new hope arises in his heart. The hope that, with every choice, he might be able to rebuild her trust and, perhaps, win over what he now realizes is the love of his life. Junho, determined to prove to Ji-ah that he has changed, begins acting differently. He adopts a more open attitude with employees, taking time to listen to their ideas, something he once considered a waste of time. In meetings, he not only supports Ji-ah's initiatives, but also shows genuine backing for them, collaborating on the social responsibility projects she proposed. He realizes that prioritizing people makes the work environment healthier, visibly boosting employee morale. These changes don't go unnoticed by Ji-ah, who, though still cautious, starts to see that Junho is genuinely striving to become a better person. On a sunny afternoon, Ji-ah organizes a community event at a local school, bringing Lee Enterprises employees to interact with children and help renovate part of the building. Junho decides to attend, uninvited. He arrives in a simple volunteer uniform, ready to help. Initially, Ji-ah watches him with some distrust, but is soon surprised to see him painting walls, carrying materials, and even playing with the children. For the employees, it's almost unbelievable to see the billionaire CEO engaging in such activities. But for Ji-ah, it's proof that he's changing. During a break, they sit under a tree to rest. Junho, with a tired but sincere smile, looks at Ji-ah and confesses, "I never thought doing something like this would make me feel good." "You were right about so many things." Ji-ah, taken aback by his honesty, gives him a shy smile. "I think we all need a reminder of what really matters." Junho watches her in silence, feeling a peace he's never known before. For a moment, he forgets all the barriers between them, and with his heart pounding, he lets himself be carried away by the moment. "Ji-ah, I want to thank you for helping me see things differently." Junho's gaze is so sincere that Ji-ah feels a spark of emotion she can't ignore. She hesitates, but for the first time, she senses that the man before her may no longer be the same one who humiliated her. They share a look that seems to suspend time, and there, both realize that something deeper is blossoming between them. In the following weeks, Junho continues his commitment to the company's new vision. He establishes a special fund to support employees in financial hardship and begins creating a more open line of communication with everyone. His transformation is evident, and employees begin commenting on how the once distant and merciless CEO now appears more accessible and human. Junho's genuine transformation leaves Ji-ah feeling more conflicted. She realizes her heart is beginning to open to him, yet memories of past humiliations remain. It's only when Junho, in an unexpected gesture, approaches her outside of work and asks for an honest conversation that Ji-ah feels it might be time to truly hear what he has to say. One evening, he invites her to a casual dinner with no formalities, just the two of them. They go to a small traditional restaurant, far from the luxury and formality of their previous encounters. There, over simple dishes and the soft sound of music in the background, Junho finally opens up about everything that led him to become so cold and distant. He talks about the pressures of his family, his fear of failure, and how his life was built around a perfect image he never chose. "I realized I spent so much time trying to control everything around me that I lost the ability to see people for who they really are," he admits with a vulnerable look. And when I met you and you challenged me, it was like all my certainties crumbled. Ji-ah listens closely, realizing that the man sitting across from her is someone completely different from the person who once humiliated her. In a moment of sincerity, she also opens up about the hurt she carried for so long and the pain of being treated as someone inferior. She admits that, although he has changed, the wounds are still there, but that, little by little, he's managing to show that he deserves a second chance. In that moment, they both realize there's something stronger than the hurt and pride that once divided them. They share a timid smile, and Junho gathers the courage to hold Ji-ah's hand, which she hesitantly allows. It's a simple gesture, but it carries profound meaning, symbolizing the bridge they've built between the past and the future. After this conversation, Ji-ah allows her heart to open up to Junho, and their relationship deepens and becomes more genuine. In the workplace, they continue as a dedicated team, determined to transform Lee Enterprises into an innovative and humane company. Outside of work, they begin to share moments that strengthen their bond, discovering that together, they are stronger than they ever imagined. One day, during an important meeting, Ji-ah and Junho present a project that combines technology and social impact, something that represents the balance between both of their visions. Executives and employees applaud the initiative, and Junho, looking at Ji-ah by his side, feels that he has finally found someone who not only challenges him, but completes him. Months later, after a journey of transformation and learning, Junho and Ji-ah officially become a couple, to the joy of the employees who witnessed their evolution from rivals to partners, and finally, to lovers. They realize that the path leading them here was full of obstacles, but also filled with moments that made them grow and change. Junho lets go of the pride that once guided his life, and Ji-ah, now a confident and successful woman, finds in Junho a partner who respects and values her. On a quiet night as they walk through the city lights, Junho stops and holds Ji-ah's hands, looking into her eyes with deep affection. "Thank you for never giving up on showing me who I could be," he says with an emotional smile. "Because of you, I found something much greater than success. I found what truly matters." Ji-ah smiles, feeling that she has finally found the love and partnership she always desired. She responds softly, "And I found someone who challenges me every day to be stronger. Together, we're not just a company, we're a family." They embrace under the city lights, ready for a future together, where love, respect, and mutual support will be the pillars of their new life.